All right. Mic check, sound check. Gaurav, can you see me, hear
Yes,
me? All
I
good?
can hear you. Good.
People on chat, if you can see me, hear me, just write something on chat. It'll be good to get some feedback. We'll wait for maybe a couple minutes for people to roll in, and then we'll start. All right. I think we have the first chats in. I'll get the slides up. All right, my screen's visible. All right, this looks good. We have people saying confirmations as well. Thanks, Patricia. Thanks, Jen. All right. Oh, wow. We already have 26 people. There's way more than I expected on a late Friday. I think we can start. I think we have enough quorum. Good morning, afternoon for everybody joining today, and evening for whoever's joining from outside the US. Uh, this is going to be a webinar on replacing Twilio video for telehealth. Now, most of you folks who are joining, we've kept the invite list fairly targeted, are either one of the folks who've been affected or sort of are linked to teams that have been affected because of this. Twilio already announced its end of life last December. You have till December 2024 to find a replacement. Now, what's happened in the last 3 months is we've gone around talking to a bunch of companies who are planning out this migration. For most of them, for all of them, this was not something that they had planned for, and a lot of them had chosen Twilio at the peak of the pandemic, or maybe a little earlier than that, and haven't had reasons to. Twilio works fairly well. It's a fantastic product. Haven't had reasons to keep up with what's changing in the WebRTC API space, and there's like a set of common questions that keep coming up. And personally, some of the best conversations I've had during this period about how should companies look for vendors, what's important, how to sort of separate noise in judging, let's say, quality of a vendor or support levels of a vendor, have been with Gaurav. And Gaurav's graciously agreed to do this webinar. I thought this will be the best way to sort of bring out some of the highest value, highest signal to noise conversations that I've had in the space. Hopefully, all of you will get some of those questions answered through this conversation, but that's the idea. We'll try and keep this very dense. We'll wrap this up in 45 minutes. So it's 11 a.m. Pacific right now, 11:45. We'll try and wrap this up. We'll leave room for questions. So please keep on asking your questions on chat. We'll try and take them at the end. Yeah, with that context, let's start very quickly. Quick introduction about the company and myself. So we are 100 MS. We build live video API for the world. We've been doing this for about 4 years now. Used by a lot of big companies. Do 1 billion minutes a month. A very similar service to Twilio Video, but we only focus on live video outside of just WebRTC APIs. We do HLS streaming as well. But as sort of one of the founders of this company, I've had like the opportunity to talk to a lot of these customers, and that's the context that I bring in. But the main man today is Gaurav, who's the SVP and GM of products at Gong, but more importantly was the VP and GM of products at Video and Voice at Twilio. Gaurav, if you could just quickly talk a little bit about your journey at Twilio, maybe we can start from there.
Yeah, thank you, Aniket. Thank you for having me on the webinar. Very nice to meet everyone. So I spent over 3 years at Twilio, leading the video product organization and the business through the pandemic. As as you'd imagine, the business exploded with more and more people going online, and from Twilio being not a big player in telehealth and in video for telehealth to becoming essentially one of the mainstream platforms that many organizations build their telehealth systems on. So it was a very satisfying journey. And I know it's a challenging time now with Twilio having announced the end of life. and I want to make sure that I can share all of the learnings that I've had working with hundreds or even thousands of telehealth companies over the last 3.5 years as you are evaluating your options in terms of for continuity of your service and even improvements of your services.
Awesome. Look, as I said, I think your insights of having built during sort of the rush of pandemic. I think it's like a super pressure environment. Everybody's looking to build in, like, move in a month, couple of months. I think what you guys went through then in building out the product and sort of having such a close eye on the issues there, I think will be super relevant as we go along. Maybe let's just jump straight into this specific piece. Like, what are the constraints that telehealth companies, and maybe I've not touched on this point very specifically, telehealth is one of the biggest users of Twilio video right now. And we thought what we figured out is telehealth customers are very different from, let's say, your proctoring customers. Like, judging quality for a one-on-one conversation super different from judging it for a live proctored exam. What product constraints or business constraints have you seen telehealth companies have that make their requirements sort of super unique?
Yeah. So I think again, as I mentioned, I had the opportunity to work with hundreds, if not thousands, of telehealth companies during my time and see them build out solutions, take them to market, as well as scale them. And I think there were a lot of commonalities in terms of what are some of the key requirements that you think about in terms of telehealth. And telehealth, does span a bunch of scenarios. Obviously, the most prominent ones being doctors and patients talking to each other. But in general, like what I found is that as companies operated their solutions and built their solutions, often what happened was that the environments that both doctors and patients were working on were fairly unstable in terms of network conditions, in terms of being behind firewalls, different device types that they were using, older browsers and a variety of browsers. And so often what we found is that the overall um environment was not that stable, and so quality became front and center. One of the most important factors in making sure that these high stake conversations that were happening in a way that they were productive. Most of these are paid conversations for a patient, also something that they're very nervous in when they're going talking to a doctor. At the same time, the doctor is extremely busy, or the nurse is really busy, or the therapist is really busy. And so, how do you make sure that the success rate of those conversations is extremely high, and nothing else is coming through? And often, anything. Uh, like customers always ask us, like, how can you give us tools that can make us confident that the quality will remain high, and when there are issues, how can we debug them real time and look at historical problems so that we can go and proactively sort of work with our customers, as opposed to doctors who typically have no time to go solve for tell them. So that's I would say most of the challenges in telehealth lay there. And there are obviously others where there are some unique requirements in terms of solutions that telehealth companies are trying to build, which tend to be very different than education or proctoring or the next social vendor, and honestly very important and mostly aligned with how they play in the ecosystem, um, with interpreters, for example, or with other systems that they need to integrate into.
I think this piece is sort of important to understand um, because you have both participants not super incentivized to figure out, okay, if this call's going wrong, how do I make sure that it's right? Because that's something that's telehealth is sort of one of the few spaces in which this happens, because you typically have in education, one side there's a teacher who's making money out of this and they have all of the incentive to make sure that their setup's fine. In social, you'll have a live streamer who has all of the incentive to make sure that this is fine. The other thing is, people in a lot of cases, let's say more than half of the cases, would not be installing apps. These are one-time use cases, or let's say even if it's a one-time use case, it's a repeat use case. You're doing a lot of these calls for the first time, and you'd be doing this on your mobile web. And mobile web is sort of a spectacularly underrated sort of user of WebRTC in general. Like, there's a reason why Zoom, Google Meet, none of them have mobile web clients. Now, these sort of set of requirements, quality is super important, but not neither of the actors are incentivized to figure out what's wrong with their quality. And mobile web sort of making this big and important thing makes quality, debuggability. I think we'll touch upon all of those points, like super important, way more than you would have in a lot of other setups. And the reason why this is important to understand is when you sort of read, in my opinion, like when you sort of read generic pitches on quality or sort of why our stack is better than another stack, when some vendors say this, you have to place it in this context. Like what doesn't matter for you is as a customer is how you handle, let's say, 10,000 viewers at one point. What matters is how well do you handle mobile web error conditions, and we'll come to about all of these points. Right. Now, all right, given these constraints, how, like in your mind, if you were one of these customers, what are the sort of key themes or the most important thing that you should be looking at when you're evaluating a vendor?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think let's just talk about table stakes to get them out of the way, right? So obviously, being in the telehealth space, you need HIPAA, right? You need GDPR compliance. Like you need a secure and reliable data privacy led, platform that you can depend on. You need something that's scalable. A lot of these conversations are happening during peak times in the day, and you want high levels of concurrency and scale. So that's, I think, obviously, again, from my perspective, those are just the table stakes, right? That any platform needs to have. But in addition to that, like, I think there are two pieces which I think you really want to hone in on. The one is quality, and we should talk a little bit more about quality and in terms of what are the important pieces. The other is really on the level of support and monitoring and the customer level monitoring that a vendor can provide you. Because that is like in telehealth, what I found is there are uniqueness in terms of environments people operate in, and some of them are on the doctor side. So you do need a vendor who can go in and sort of make sure that they can proactively monitor and give you all the assistance that is required outside of the tooling. And I would say a third category is probably some of the capabilities that are unique to telehealth. And so we spoke about one, which is like integrating with interpreters that are out there, core use case, but also, more and more. When I was at Twilio, like what I heard a lot was like people wanting to do things like real time translation, as well as like doctors' notes, and providing more and more productivity to doctors and nurses and therapists in that scenario. So I'd say, those are the big categories. So like to recap, like obviously quality and support are the big ones. There's features, and then there's the table stakes, which you would expect of any vendor you want to move from. And I think obviously, especially if you're moving from Twilio, given they're obviously a very robust platform on the scale side. So maybe we can, like, Aniket, if it sounds good, maybe we can dig into the quality debuggability. Does that
Yeah,
make sense? Yeah.
let's do that. I think one of the common themes that comes to us, and this speaks to the sort of I think great job that you guys had done, is not a lot of at least the smaller customers understand how difficult it is to sort of run quality, reliable 1:1 calls. Because if you've always been on Twilio Video, or if you
Yeah.
use Zoom as your consumer app, it doesn't come up as like the first thing that you should be looking for. Like people typically come in, can you support AI? Can you support transcription, summary? Those are all nice and good. We should be able to do this, but making sure that your vendor matches Twilio's quality or maybe beats Twilio Video's quality, I think is like one of the most important things. Let's talk about quality. I think that is, as we said, like the key piece to judge. Now, it's sort of like a broader point. How do you judge Twilio sort of WebRTC vendors' quality and what matters in a one scenario? But like, give me your take on this. I have like some thoughts on it.
Yeah.
Would love to know.
I'll give you a sense of like what I heard. That's probably most helpful, right, from customers when they were assessing quality and using quality. So one of the things that customers came to us and always asked us is like, at Twilio we had a very, very flexible platform, right? It was optimized for people who actually were WebRTC experts, and so often, like if you were a WebRTC expert and you knew what you were doing in video, you could actually get the platform to be pretty high quality. However, what we found with working with hundreds of customers, that most people are not, super deep in terms of their WebRTC expertise, and even if they were, they don't know how quality should be configured and tuned based on different conditions, and like we spoke about, browser conditions, device conditions, etc. So one of the things, like I think my learning was that vendors who can actually provide, who can actually provide not just the flexibility, but also like the right configurations and defaults that will make the conversations high quality across a variety of browsers, devices, network conditions, and not only automatically do things like degradation from video to audio if the quality goes down, but also providing like the right level of like indication back to the user, both the doctors and the patients. Because often, like, doctors and patients are used to using consumer apps, and the way they know things are going not going great is when the app tells them when their network conditions are poor because they're in a low network area or their internet went out or whatever it may be, because that sort of increases the trust in the system, both for the doctors and the patients, right? So I think from my perspective, like that, like providing defaults that actually work in all of these environments is highly important. I think the other is like when things go wrong, and they will go wrong, providing tools so that you can go and actually real-time debug sessions, but also historically go back and look at, are there certain patterns in terms of geos, in terms of devices, in terms of networks that your application may be suffering through, that you can go solve for. So I think that's the second layer, right, of debuggability and quality. And then from a benchmark perspective, like, I think it is pretty important, and we heard this a lot, where customers wanted us to benchmark against Zoom and other like Teams and other providers, but also against existing vendors they may have had in terms of quality, looking at frame rates, looking at like freeze rates, looking at like jitter buffer, other things. And so really understanding, and like I would sort of encourage you as you're evaluating the to push your vendors to actually do that level of testing and give you the benchmarks and give you the proactive monitoring and proactive results on how they perform on different devices and browsers, because usually the quality ratings that they share with you or reports they share with you are under ideal conditions, and unfortunately in the telehealth world nothing operates under ideal conditions given the challenges we spoke about. Does
I
that
think
make sense?
no, I think this is super helpful. So I think one of the reasons why when we initially started 100 ms was essentially a lot of customers. You talked about setting the right conditions and setting automatic degradations.
Yeah.
Like that was the entire thesis of why we started 100 ms initially. And I think a lot of SDKs have caught up and like do a good job of this. But I think what I like what I've always taken from these conversations with you is the obsession that you as a customer have to have in sort of doing these pre-checks on quality even before sort of writing the first line of code. So we all say that yeah, it should work with high quality, but how do you actually judge it? I think
Yeah.
it's worth spending like a couple of weeks uh, figuring out how well a vendor handles quality. And maybe what I'll try to do is a lot of customers have talked to us about like vendor A is telling me their quality. Like everybody tells like we'll do automatic degradations. Everybody tells you that oh we have like this fantastic network, which means that everything will be fine. But like you'll always have your final doctors or let's say your operations team coming back and saying that oh like Zoom worked, but like your platform didn't work or one of those questions. And it's very difficult to figure out what went wrong. To separate out like the wheat from the chaff here, which is what is like what's when a WebRTC vendor tells you that hey I have this XYZ thing, how do you actually validate that they actually do it? I'll talk a little bit about that in the context of quality because that is important. Broadly, I've broken down quality sort of into three factors, and they're all important. Sort of, they all have to operate in conjunction to be able to sort of give you really good quality. The first is, let's say, how the core WebRTC stack that all of these vendors are using. Zoom uses their own RTC stack. We'll like, keep that aside for a little bit. But now within WebRTC stack, there's a lot of terms that will be thrown at you. But what you're essentially looking for bandwidth estimation and congestion control superiority. If a network goes bad, how do you switch your bit rates, FPSs, codecs? What is the sort of logic and algorithm that the stack is using under the hood for this? Now, now it's beyond the scope of most evaluations to be able to actually understand the algorithm. But testing this is relatively simple, or at least testing out the bad vendors here is relatively simple. Just take everybody's sample apps and then use, there's like a couple of tools, network link conditioner, there are certain apps, run it through like poor network conditions, and then actually visually see which ones freeze more, which ones do you have like more audio packets dropping. You can automatically hear this. Do this 10 times, 20 times. Do calls in conditions that are similar to your end customer. So use data on a mobile phone, on a mobile browser, on their sample app. Do this for like a couple of weeks on your internal test. That's the most important thing. What you're looking for is, if a network goes bad, how does the video call actually feel like? So that's the first thing. Test it yourself, and then ask for benchmarks. When people are actually, vendors are giving you, like, talking about certain terms, look for these terms. There's often this. Uh, I think a lot of vendors have this go overboard by making up their own terms, but look for simulcast, temporal scaling, spatial scaling. These are all sort of standard WebRTC algorithms, WebRTC techniques that should be in their stacks. Ask for these things. Ask for a degradation to audio only mode. If your use case supports it, if bandwidth goes very low, the call should still continue. It should automatically switch to audio. Look for these terms. What this also means is avoid a lot of the other terms that might get thrown to you in this space. Benchmarks, there's a standard way of doing benchmarks. A lot of companies have their tests. Look for this. We'll also share, there's a blog that we have done against Twilio. We'll share this at the end of the webinar. You guys can look at it. And then look for device coverage. This is going to be super, super important. Often what happens is Safari will update their browser and will break something with WebRTC. There's echo with every new doctor who's upgraded their iOS. Look for past issues around browser updates. So when Safari 12 got launched, look for the GitHub issues or the forums on how these vendors handle that then. You look, so this goes beyond. So everybody will say that they handle the sort of the standard set of devices, but look for their responses to past issues. That will give you a sense of how well they like handle these errors. You want as minimum, because no doctor is going to excuse you, oh, Safari updated, hence this broke. Nobody's going to like give you grace for that. You want the vendor to be handling this quickly, proactively, way before that it actually sort of boils down. Look for device coverage, test for network conditions. And the third piece, this gets talked about the most, but I think this is relatively simple to solve for. Just ask for two US locations, one in the US East, one in the US West. That's plenty to cover any one-on-one scenario in within a US telehealth call. Like, you'll have like a bunch of things thrown around here, but like just two US servers is plenty good enough. Mesh SFUs are good to have, but like that's the base level. So look for these things: two US locations, how sample apps handle poor network conditions, ask for benchmarks, and look for these specific WebRTC terms. We'll share the slides as well, and not too much sort of fluff there. So that's
Yeah, Aniket,
that's
that's great. Like, I think I can't speak enough about like the network condition degradation, and then the other one, essentially around like really challenging your vendors to, be proactive on device coverage and browser coverage, as well as as you mentioned, the responsiveness around that, because things will go down, especially with Safari. And so, how do you make sure that the vendors are proactively going in, identifying and solving them, and also playing a part in the community?
uh, just wrapping up like the point on debuggability, which is like the next thing that you talked about, which is once quality does go down, how does your ops team or your doctor or even your developer be able to debug what went wrong with the call? Twilio Video, in my opinion, has one of the best sort of debugging dashboards that's already out there. Hold your vendors to the same standards or ask them to beat it. Have a timeline view of errors, summary view of errors, timeline view of all of the sort of the under the hood metrics, round trip, latency, jitter. You should be able to see the sort of the error regions very easily. It should be something that your ops team should be able to debug, your developer team should be able to debug. Again, just look at Twilio Video. I think you guys already did a fantastic job of this. That should be the bare minimum that you're looking at. Okay. The next thing that you talked about beyond quality and debuggability was support and customer level monitoring. Just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think the reason that becomes really important is because of the, we spoke about like looking at a vendor that, is proactive, is has a platform that has best practices and sort of defaults and all the tools to go debug. However, the reality is, like, given the scale of operation for many of the telehealth vendors and the environments that they're operating in, as we discussed, things will go wrong, right? Things will go wrong. And so what you want in a vendor is someone who can really, is highly responsive, is willing to jump on and sort of go and work with you on the challenges that you're seeing, provide you all the data that's needed. And then, you're going to likely have, in the telehealth space, given the ecosystem, you'll have to work with some legacy players out there. And so you want a vendor who can actually go and help you go do that, not someone who is unwilling to go do that. And I'd sort of be honest, like, even in the Twilio days, like, we were a fairly large company where we couldn't go as deep in some of the needs that customers had. For example, integration into SIP and SIP video with interpreters. Everyone has a slightly unique way of how they've integrated it and certifications, and we were, not able to go as deep as our customers wanted. And so providing that, so that's on one level. The other is, telehealth is a pretty critical service. So vendors who can actually provide customer specific monitoring, customer level monitoring, and SLAs that are specific to a customer, and ideally even go one step further and sort of guarantee quality. I think those are ones, which you want as a partner, given the volatility of video in general and audio across devices and browsers.
So this is something that's very interesting. Like, did you guys actually have, for example, let's say some mental therapy platform, or let's say some aggregator platform having issues with a specific therapist versus a specific sort of clinic? Would that often come up? Like, you'd identify issues down to like that level, because you talked about customer level monitoring and sort of having metrics that make sense.
Yep.
Would that come up often?
So I think it would definitely come up as an issue where, there are US telehealth providers supporting a hospital system, or you're providing supporting a mental health clinic, and the challenges are unique to the clinic, right, or clinic to the hospital system. And so what you need is, you really needed a way for your vendor to be able to go and, in our case, Twilio, to go in and really help identify what the challenges and issues were, even though we had all the tools made available, right? So that's one. The other is, like, as you are a high stakes vendor, let's say you are one of the largest mental health providers running on a platform, uh, it gives you and your customers a lot more confidence to say that, your vendor is proactively making sure that they are not identifying and fixing any challenges they see around quality and obviously stability for sure. But, you do not expect those challenges on stability with most of these players operating at 3 nines or 4 nines, in many cases 5 nines. But definitely around quality, right? So anyone who can go in and sort of really look at, like, for your traffic patterns, for the geos you are operating in, for the types of customers and users you have, is the level of quality consistent and maintained. And so, not many people do that. Like, I think the other industries where you see this a lot, I think in the video industry, like, I think I'd encourage all of you to raise the bar from your vendors, because I think it is something which I think we have the tooling to go solve for.
So I think this often sort of, when we initially sort of start selling in the market, and people, so consumers who would buy us for the first time, this would often come up like some of your calls didn't, like n number of your calls didn't work through the month. Surely this is covered under the SLAs.
Yep.
And like, it wasn't then. Like, now we do like a different job. But what we figured out is, like, most vendors provide these uptime SLAs, which is 4 nines throughout. uh, but nobody actually guarantees that the calls will work, because it is incredibly difficult. You can't control like the end user's conditions. What you can do, as you said, like, is relative to um, like the conditions that you as a customer have, promise something that will better that, or keep that at a bare minimum bar. The important thing is not what that sort of percentage could be. We've seen numbers from 92, 96, 97% in different conditions. But I think what's important is aligning, as you said, like the incentive of the vendor to actually have the incentive to step into each of these individual issues that have happened, like for that particular clinic, for that particular therapist. And that only happens if you align these SLAs. Just like just reiterating what you just said, look for proactive versus reactive support. Look for call success SLAs, not uptime SLAs. Look for customer level dashboards and alerts. Often you would have sort of aggregate dashboards, but not alert setup. I think these things help. For example, there should be an alert if a particular geo or a particular customer segment, like in a particular state, is constantly failing on calls, or if there's like a specific device that's constantly causing issues uh, uh, in your calls. That only happens if you can get to these detailed sort of dashboards. So look for these features around that. That will be helpful. I think we have a little time left, so I think there's some talks. I think you've talked about most of the features that we've talked about, which is um, SIP dialing for interpreters, super important. Nearly everybody is sort of asking for it or looks for it right now. There are some accessibility features, which is closed captioning. It's good to have. Most vendors now have an ability to sort of either integrate or have already integrated this. So I think uh, I don't want to sort of spend too much time on the feature specifically, because my sense is like a lot of vendors have sort of already sort of equalized at this point of time. Everybody do look for sort of SIP, the very specific kind of SIP requirement that you have. As you said, like there are several ways of doing this, but I think there's some differentiation there. Look for at least the ability to have the future to integrate like your own transcription and AI summary pipelines is what I would suggest. A lot of custom, like most vendors have like bought into the AI wave and now are providing ways to do this. There's some sort of nuance in who provides like a server side to a client side input for this. But again, if everybody has SIP dialing, some way of running transcription summary using AI, so video audio tracks, I think most vendors like do a good job of this. I'm already seeing like some questions on chat. I'll come to those, and maybe like I'll just ask like a couple of big questions. I think one of the questions that often comes up is how do you judge Zoom versus everybody else, like,
Yep.
which is Zoom's sort of the recommended partner that Twilio is recommending, and that's one of the first questions that we'll often get asked.
Yeah.
Who should choose that? Who should?
Yeah, so I think one is maybe even to start with like the app itself before we go to the SDK, right? So I think Zoom is one of the the best applications out there, partly because they control end to end from the client, what the client on one end to the client on the other end, and everything in the middle. As you know, they're not using WebRTC; they're using their own version of it, and so it is a closed ecosystem. But they've done an amazing job with the application, and so if building is not for you and you realize that that's not you don't want to go own and build the application, then Zoom application is obviously an amazing sort of option. In terms of SDK, and if you are building, and there are many reasons to build, including controlling the experience, providing the best experience, and also like the fact that we spoke about the use cases, the most broad and viable sort of way for doctors and patients to connect is really on the browser, right? Whether it's mobile or web. And so for that, I think Zoom, the Zoom SDK is, I think it's a great option. It is not WebRTC in its pure form. So, it does not take advantage of all of the innovation that's happening in WebRTC and all of the enhancements that the community is doing. And, I would say from my experience looking at Zoom video SDK is, it's an amazing SDK if you are building an application on Zoom. I think if you are trying to build a browser application using the SDKs, I think pure WebRTC is just a much better solution in terms of being viable across all of the browsers, all the devices, high quality, and leveraging and providing you all of the customizability and flexibility as a developer to be able to take advantage. So I think from my perspective, I think one of the WebRTC platforms is a much more powerful solution that you can benefit from in terms of building a telehealth solution.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing this up. I think uh, Zoom not being WebRTC specifically. I mean, Zoom does such a fantastic job of their consumer app.
Yep.
I think everybody's sort of first instinct is, oh, app equals SDK, which means SDK has the same things. But as soon as you push a lot of those limitations into the browser, you again sort of run into a lot of the same issues that you would have to solve for, because browsers don't essentially allow you full flexibility in sort of controlling video that Zoom takes advantage of in their app. And Zoom choosing their own RTC method, like whatever they use under the hood, uh, does like also exclude them. Like there's a important piece. There's a huge movement behind WebRTC. Look at all the sort of work that's being done in open source at the improvements. So there's a lot of Google Meet sort of openly embraces this. Teams embraces this. There are like large organizations, open source developers who are constantly working to improve WebRTC. That like Zoom is doing this internally on their own stack, but you'd typically sort of back WebRTC over like sort of an open framework which has enough sort of large organizations who've adopted it to sort of beat it out over in the long term in terms of quality, reliability, and just because of the standards that WebRTC is already implemented and all of the browsers have already agreed to, something as simple as rendering a video using WebRTC stream is much simpler than using like Zoom's sort of non-traditional way of doing this.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think Zoom not being WebRTC does add a lot to the sort of developer. Let's say adds some barriers to the developer barriers. So do evaluate, and Zoom's consumer apps quality doesn't translate automatically
Yeah.
to the SDK.
And also, like, I think, like, Zoom's core strength, like, even on the consumer app side, is not the browser, right? It is the app. And so, if you do want to go build an app, and I think you should question whether you want to go build an actual mobile app for your users, because again, adoption usually is pretty low and challenging. I don't think browser is the front and center platform that Zoom is sort of optimizing for, right? So I think that's WebRTC's strength is the browser and the browser ecosystem that
Yeah,
they work hand in hand with.
yeah, and browsers, as you say, like are the place where most of these calls are happening.
Yep.
All right, maybe let's just take a few questions. We can talk about migration paths later. Some really sort of interesting questions. I think this one comes up often. So Killian asks, will you offer P2P as well as group calls?
Yep.
Um, how should like companies choose P2P over
Yeah.
like group? What were you seeing even when you were there
Yeah,
at
it
work?
was sort of interesting for us. Like, obviously, we had both P2P and rooms, and actually, we started with a P2P platform like in 2015, and then we built in rooms. And I would say, of the hundreds or even 1,000 customers we had on the platform on Telehealth, like 99.9% use group rooms. And I think it was primarily because of the quality aspects that we spoke about earlier, right? So you can control the quality, you have insights into the quality, you have a deep understanding of the quality of all the tools and debuggability around that. And so, we did see like maybe a vendor here and there which would be like very concerned about uh, like end-to-end encryption, which obviously P2P provides. But I think the trade-off between that and quality just usually does not stand the test of time, right? So I'd say 99.5 or 9% of customers that we had used group rooms.
Yeah, this is what we've also seen. I think
Yeah.
this is more like a theoretical question now. Most people just choose group rooms. There is like a very sort of niche area where P2P calls like outperform quality on group rooms. I think that's if you're in the same hospital and sort of doing calls in the same network, it works well. But as soon as you sort of move to public networks and slightly further away from each other, having the ability to have the server modulate like the algorithms to sort of different networks, I think that sort of improves it. Obviously, once you add group rooms is only when you can add recording, you can add
Yeah.
transcription, you can add all of the like SIP services, all of the add-on services that you want. So that's the other thing. So I think from if this helps answer, like most companies are choosing group rooms. I think that's the standard way of doing this. There's very little trade-off. Kunal's asked for any existing open source projects on testing WebRTC services that you've heard of, or how did you like, do this?
So within Twilio, we did quite a lot of it homegrown. We did do most of it homegrown. There are obviously things out there like this test RTC and other things that are out there. Um, None that come to mind, which are like, I do think most vendors should build their own, and they can leverage a open source framework. They should be building their own. I know your question is probably more from a customer perspective, like what should we use? I think you should hold your vendors accountable to make sure that you don't need to worry about quality, and you can worry about application testing and not quality testing, right?
Yeah, so this is a great question to ask. Like, unfortunately, like I have also not seen like a great open source solution for this. I think most vendors have built their own test beds, push them to open source it for you folks. So I'll tell you where the difference. So there's a couple of vendors, by the way. Test RTC is great. Sahi runs that. You guys should take a look at that. TestDev Lab out of Latvia, I think they've done some great job for Zoom, for Twilio in the past. I think they're also good. So they can do these great things. But if that's out of the scope, ask for your vendors to, like, most of them have these benchmarking codes with them. Like, ask them to supply the code or give them the code base that they are basing. If you really want to get into the details of those tests, ask them to supply the code bases. I'll tell you where a lot of these benchmarking tests can become a little difficult to judge. Is what will often happen is someone will take like their own best settings and then choose like unfavorable favorable settings for like the other vendor, and then try and compare the two, like not match bit rates, not match FPSS codecs, like simulcast layers, a bunch of things. If you get access to the code from one of your vendors, like I think it's like a couple of days of effort to figure out how to at least make sure that the right settings are there. So no open source like great solutions, unfortunately, that I know of, Kunal. But like the shortest way is ask your favorite vendors to supply their codes and make sure that the tests that they're running are actually on similar conditions. I think that should be the best way to do it. All right. WebRTC based usually struggle with Mweb is what I've observed with Twilio. Has Zoom done well in that as well, which is mobile web Zoom. Have you had experiences with Zoom SDK and mobile web?
Yeah, I think from what I heard, again, I haven't developed on Zoom SDK myself, but from what I heard from customers who sort of tried it out, and even with some of the other vendors, I think mobile web continues to be a challenge. And as I said, um, from a Zoom SDK perspective, I think they've optimized more for the mobile app, like the iOS and Android SDK, as opposed to um, doing anything substantially innovative on the mobile website, right? So I would expect some of the challenges you saw with Twilio probably persist on Zoom as well. And I would say, if anything, Twilio actually had more of a investment focus in terms of making the mobile web a primary platform, given the use cases we saw.
Actually, on this piece, I think Zoom's probably weaker than everybody else. I don't quote me on this because I haven't actually tested it out. But because Zoom itself doesn't have a consumer mobile web platform, they have a consumer app, they have a desktop app, and they've been running the SDK on the desktop browser for a while, so they have some business on that. I think even on the official forums, I remember seeing that mobile web sort of has limited support. In general, mobile web is a challenging thing to support for all WebRTC vendors. It's like because of the restrictions that the device places on the browser. Um, uh, I don't think like Zoom's again, I'll have to go into the details. My sense is Zoom's not done a great job of this. If anything, I would bet they'd probably like fall on maybe the lower end of performance on mobile web than other vendors. All right, another topic, the question that's coming up often is AWS Chime. So one thing that we've tried to do is everybody's asking your opinion on AWS. I don't know if you want to answer this or not. Like, we've tried and sort of stayed neutral throughout and not talk about like specific vendors outside of Zoom, because that's the only vendor that's been recommended. But if you have any opinions on Chime, I think a lot of people want to.
Yeah, I think Chime, I would say, just I think they were very, very nascent early on in the pandemic, and I think they've done a nice job in terms of building out their platform. Obviously, I think the primary reason to use Chime is if you really want to go all in on AWS. That still becomes the primary reason, where you don't want to deal with multiple vendors and you want to deal with them. I think they're improving. I don't think they're best in class, but they're that's a strategy usually AWS has, right? And I would say the only thing which I'm always wary of there is like the Chime application, which is built on the Chime SDK, is actually a pretty terrible product. If you ask anyone at AWS, and if you've ever been on a call with anyone at Amazon, you'll know how bad that product is, right? So it sort of doesn't give me very high confidence on the quality if they're not able to optimize the application, unlike Zoom has, where Zoom has at least optimized the application completely for an amazing experience. So I think if you are going all in on AWS, it's worth evaluating on Chime.
Right. That's useful context. Maybe I'll just use I think those are all the questions. Maybe I'll just take a couple of minutes to just talk about migration paths that we've seen. If you have sort of now, assuming people have chosen like the vendor, any pointers that people should talk about when planning their migration that you have in your mind?
Yeah, I think you probably have more insights in terms of what you guys are seeing in terms of timelines and stuff. Like at high level, I would say that again, you probably want to test. You want to test it out yourself, right? So you want to not only take like the sample app that they have, but actually go and spend some time on either pre-built or like go build out an application quickly. And candidly, like if many of you are already on Twilio, it might be worth running your vendor, which you think is the best replacement in parallel as a secondary vendor, backup vendor for a little bit to see how it performs versus Twilio. You'll get your own data as well, and then from that path chart, because you still have about 9 months to migrate off, and so backup vendor strategy to start with may not be maybe a great way to migrate off.
I think this is something that not a lot of people have accounted for. But if you are operating at scale, I think you're bang on it. And this is something that is being done by everybody, at least any large customer that we are seeing. They are following the gradual backup vendor and then slowly scaling up thing.
Yep.
That is the only thing that I've seen a lot of smaller customers not account for. Just like some rough timelines that we've seen in the past. So try and do no code POCs, like the stuff that Gaurav talked about. Like use their apps to just uh, use different network conditions to test them, build a POC, and now most vendors have a pre-built product and an like a open SDK product, which is the Twilio equivalent. If you're starting from scratch, a lot of us like pre-built is like a very great solution to go for. It's not a straightforward solution to pick between the two, or maybe you have some opinions on this. Pick one. So all of this shouldn't take you more than, let's say, between 2 to 6 weeks end to end. But the migration piece, where you have to build out this adapter where a certain set of your organizations are using like the backup vendor, which is where you have chosen the primary is Twilio, and you slowly sort of dial up from 0 to 100% on the backup vendor. That process takes time. There will be issues when you sort of scale up, and you have to sort of constantly look at issues during that time. Plan for that. All of this we think is at least a quarter, maybe a quarter and a half's worth of effort. We are recommending most companies to do this in finishes by Q2, stretch it to Q3 at most, but don't let it run into Q4. That's our opinion. It's about, let's say, 2 to 14 weeks throughout end to end. If all of this seems a little daunting, if you guys can sort of go for this, there are fantastic partners who can help you with integration. WebRTC Ventures have had experience with Twilio, have had experience with a lot of the vendors. Look at them; they do a great job of this. I think they can help ease a lot of that development time that might be daunting.
And Aniket, one thing I'll add is like, because I was right in the middle of, we spoke about this right in the beginning, like during the pandemic, a lot of telehealth companies like just raced to go build something very quickly. So I would say it's also an opportunity for you to step back and sort of like look at whether what you've built with Twilio is what you would build again if you started. And so, it's an opportunity not just to replicate what you have with Twilio, but maybe even enhance and re-architect your applications as you go to market, in a more stable environment than COVID. So that'd be my other advice.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's happening very interesting in the live video space where you can sort of upgrade very quickly. The generative AI wave is sort of just hitting in. And if you go to Vive, HIMSS, any of these conferences, that's sort of the buzzword. How do you integrate that? I think there's definitely chances of upgrade and move to like achieve more on telehealth calls with this migration. I think that will be all. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing these insights. I hope everybody found this useful. Uh, Thank you so much for your time, Gaurav. And if you guys have, we'll share some of these links and the slides and maybe the video at the end of this call for those who registered. If you guys need specific questions, feel free to hit us up. We'll share our contacts again at the end of this call as well. But yeah, thanks for joining, Gaurav. Thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, folks.